Welcome to the Disruptance Podcast. The Disruptance Podcast is the show that disrupts the way entrepreneurs think to make them more profitable and impactful. Rethink tired and outdated business norms to welcome innovation and unlock your unlimited possibilities. Here are your hosts, Eric Forney and Greg Fowler.
Eric, I've been waiting a bit for this one, just so you know. And
I'm scared.
as we're diving into this, talking about your origin story. And, I've been very fortunate to have gotten to know you over time and just really feel what that's like. But for the audience and anybody who's maybe newer to the show, I really want to dive into that category. And one story that sticks out to me, at least one example that you gave was, and I quote here, moving life into the driveway. So let's just get that down to the very beginning, Eric. So you getting into the business and how we got here where we are today. I mean, you've accomplished so much. So let's just start there, wherever you want to pick it apart.
That's good. I was hoping that we weren't going to go all the way back to like Markleville, Indiana, and days of like avoiding farm work and stuff as a kid.
My favorite.
Yeah, that was avoiding farm work was also my favorite pastime as well. So, so it's interesting. I got into real estate somewhat by accident, right? I was selling paint for Sherwin-Williams in 2009 as a 25-year-old, and in 2009 I had the goal to no longer sell paint. Needless to say, I don't know anybody who enters life and goes, you know what I want to do is my aspiration is I want to run a paint sales job or run a paint store. And so I was, the reason why I wanted to get out of doing that was because what I found is that my customers made more money than I did in like flipping one house than I would make in an entire year. And as a judgmental, arrogant 25-year-old, I thought to myself, you know what, these guys, most of them, a lot of them don't have GEDs. And yet if they're able to out-earn my annual income running this business by working a few weeks or a few months, if they're able to add on me, then, I should be able to do this. And so with no experience in construction and no experience in real estate, in 2009, I went out and bought a house. Super smart. 2009 was a great real estate market, Greg, as you probably remember. So in 2009, I bought a house, and I think spent probably, the next 100 days or so remodeling it. I put every dollar I had, $8,500. Is what I think I put down on the home, and I think I had another like $8,000 that I put into the remodel. And at that point in time, I got the Barack bucks. When you got the first time home buyer money, I got the Barack bucks initially to put into the house, and the intent was to flip the house and to get rich. I was for sure going to flip it and get rich. Well, needless to say, we had like 75 showings in 90 days, and finally got an offer accepted. And then I had moved all of my furniture and all of my life into the driveway because I didn't have enough money to like live somewhere else and own a home. So I had to move in temporarily with the plan of flipping this house. I was going to make $22,000. I had already calculated how I was going to spend it. It would have made me like the wealthiest person that I probably knew at the time. I'd had $22,000 as a 25-year-old, and I'm not sure what I was going to do with it. I just know that I had already thought about every way I was going to spend it. And needless to say, 4 days before closing, everything changed. I'd moved all my furniture, all my life into a pod in the driveway. And 4 days prior to closing, the buyer decided that they no longer wanted to purchase the home. And so for some reason that I never understood and never was told, they just decided that they didn't want to buy it. But I'd already mentally spent the money. And so at this point in time, and I'd done all the work to move into the driveway. And so at this point in time, I was devastated. Like I was hopeless at that point. I had decided that was like my ticket out of selling paint. And that was the ticket to doing something other than mixing paint and wearing khakis and a blue polo shirt every day. And so I never figured out why they didn't buy the house, but it was 4 days before, and here I was. I'm left hopeless with everything I own in a pod in the driveway. And then I've got to move it back inside to the house, and eventually it took 3 years before that house sold. And funny enough, the very first buyer, after the third year, the next buyer did the exact same thing again, but it wasn't 4 days before. It was probably like a week prior to closing. And so my first two experiences in real estate were when people opted to sign a contract up in my life and decide not to honor the contract without any care or without any consideration as to the fact that there's another party on the opposite side of the transaction whose life you've upended and whose life you're holding hostage by the sale of real estate. And so after going through that experience and feeling the way that I felt, I vowed that I just never wanted to deal with a real estate agent ever again. Mm. And if I ever worked with consumers, I didn't want those same consumers to feel the exact same way that I felt, which was hopeless and uninformed. And so got a real estate license with the plan of never working with real estate agents again. So much for that. However, it was the start of the career was to offer a different product. One where you sign a contract and you honor a contract, because the fact that I was able to move my entire life into the middle of a driveway and there were no repercussions or no consequences for someone terminating a contract, or better yet, someone holding themselves to their cell phone contract higher than they hold themselves to a real estate contract. I just didn't want that to ever happen again, and so that was what initially was the fuel to provide a different service.
And the fact that you're kind of going down that road, Eric, I mean, it's a massive testament to, your personal and professional experiences and how you're really projecting that out into the marketplace, doing things in a very different way and educating and training so many others to do the same. I know you were putting some people on blast there with the cell phone contract. So if you're tuning in and that is you, shame on you. And you know that you're rubbing Eric the wrong way, that's for sure. But Eric, I before we dive into what I want to consider some landmine stories or some war stories that I would love to hear from your perspective, okay. What was, as you were going through that $20,000 check that was coming your way to change the life as you knew it, what were you going to spend it on? What were the things that popped in your head? I mean, was there anything that you remember? I mean, back then?
The only guess that I have is, and I've told this story is a little bit, it's mildly embellished, but still directionally accurate. But it's for effect. But I remember as a kid, my parents, we remodeled our house, and we started remodeling our house in like 94. Why I remember that, I don't know. But in 94, we started remodeling our house, and, we grew up, and there's 144 people in the town that I was raised in. So there was nothing to do. And basically like that one half of our house got chopped off. And so as they were working at our house on the weekends, we couldn't really stay there and do anything because it was, construction war zone. And so we would go to the mall in Indianapolis, and that was like 45 minutes away. And I remember as a kid, for some reason, we would always drive by where the rich people lived. And I remember my dad always asking the question or pointing out like that, what do these people do? Because at the time that would have been, like Homerama and Home Shows. These would have been the new houses that had gone up in 94 and where the rich people lived. And, I can just distinctly remember my dad saying, like, if I had that much money, I sure as hell wouldn't live in Indiana. I wouldn't spend that much money living in Indiana.
Interesting.
And I don't know why, I just always remember that conversation as we would drive by the rich people houses and my dad not understanding why anybody would spend money to live there. And so when I was old enough, I don't know, it was probably same time frame, probably 25 or something also. My buddies and I, we would go, I bought a boat, the SS Fish and Chicks. And we would take out the SS Fish and Chicks on that lake where the rich people lived when I was a kid. And so my buddies and I, we would go out and we would drive around the lake, and we would talk about pooling our money together, like the dumb ideas you have as like 20-something-year-old guys. We were going to pool our money together, and then we were going to live in one of the houses around the lake. Because that was the only way we were ever going to be able to actually afford to live in one of those houses. And so my assumption is that I was probably going to spend the money on the SS Fish and Chicks.
Yeah.
And so eventually I did actually buy the boat.
Okay.
And funny enough, I actually live in one of the houses today that we drove by as a kid, where those people lived. And so my assumption is that was probably the origin of what I would have done.
And that's what a full circle kind of moment there, as a kid riding with your dad, talking about that versus reflecting on what you did to get to where you are today.
Yeah.
I guess the follow-up question to that, do you currently own the SS Fish and Chicks?
I do
not on
not.
the water, Eric. So I'm assuming there's some boats there.
There are a lot of boats there, and we do not own one. I'm not sure that Lauren would love the SS Fish and Chicks, although she does get a kick out of the story usually. So, no, we don't own a boat. We used to do this deal where I had the boat and my buddy would buy the slip. And so, he'd pay like $1,800 or whatever to park the boat on the lake. And then I gave him an extra set of keys, and we worked that deal out for the longest time. And then when we bought our house on the lake and installed the dock, he has a boat. And so he returns the favor. I've got the dock, he's got the boat, and an extra set of keys. And so, I don't know, for the last 15 years, that's probably how that's worked.
Wow, man. No, I love that. And again, I agree with you, for Lauren's sake. I don't think my wife would want that thing happen either. So I totally get that perspective, Eric. No, I love the story behind this because, again, just letting people into your life and your background. And again, so much is transpired from that time frame in your career and hitting exponential growth in the highest of levels through real estate as a professional. You've seen a lot. You've been through a lot,
right?
And there's some perspective that I think, people would really get a kick out of and learn a lot from as you kind of dissect this breakdown. What comes to mind, Eric? When you're talking about holding to a higher standard and really representing the consumer in a completely different light, and then training and educating real estate professionals to do the same, what are some things that you've seen or that stand out over your career that just made you stop and think, what is going on here?
Yeah. I'll give you the war stories of the ways that we've screwed up for what it's worth. And I'm not told this story because not in this manner, at least,
Sure.
Not in my one-to-one conversation with some people, but because to me, there was no reason to glorify it or something, but I remember, I don't know, it was probably 2019 or something. I had a house listed for sale for a client that, I had probably been working with her for a significant amount of time to try to get into getting the house on the market. And that probably was 17, actually, now that I think about it. So the market wasn't as good. You couldn't just put a house up for sale and everything sold.
Sure.
The market was still strong, but it was more of a neutral market.
Mm-hmm.
And so this house has been on the market for a while, and we finally got a buyer for it. And it was a buyer who was going to be relocating from some other state. Mm-hmm. And just happened that they called into the office and they got one of the other agents on the team. And so the relocation buyer was going to work with one of my colleagues, and then I was the seller, the listing agent. And at that point in time, like realtors do, I was like, this is awesome. We're going to get paid on both sides of the transaction, right? We're going to represent the buyer, we're going to represent the seller, did all the necessary disclosures, everybody was well informed and so on. But because we had both sides of the transaction, I think we were a little lazy. Mm-hmm. And we were lazy on the due diligence aspect of it. And come to find out, I don't know, it was probably 10 days or something prior to the closing where we realized that we had missed due diligence by a lot. Wow. And that buyer actually didn't have a job, wasn't moving, and didn't have any pre-approval for a mortgage. And so now I've got a seller who thinks that their house is sold, And the reason that it's not sold has something to do with the fact that we failed to uphold our end of the deal as the agent who she'd hired.
Wow.
And so I called her, and I don't even know what I was going to say, if anything.
Wow.
And I remember she answered, and she's like, "Yeah, I just left my new place. I just, moved into my new, this new apartment that I'm renting, or a new house that she was renting. And she had just finished moving her house into an apartment." And here it was, it's like a week or two prior to closing, remember, and we failed to do our job. And I remember, I'm like, I don't have the heart to tell this woman that we failed her. That she hired us to do a job and protect her best interest and to look out for her and for her house, and we failed. And I don't have the heart to tell her, and so I bought her house. Wow. And because I didn't do my job, and so I bought her house and ensured that she was able to move on and move out on time and move forward, because I don't know, there was something about it where I'm like, I can't with a straight face know that I was paid to protect someone's best interest and know that I failed at it and do nothing. And so it was without question to me that was just the right thing to do, and that's what we did. And so I say that as a perspective of, I realize that not everyone has that capability. I get it.
Sure.
Now, we had that capability because we managed the business well.
Mm-hmm.
That capability because that's the type of approach and mindset that we applied to every customer, which was that level of ownership. And so, funny enough, when you take that level of ownership and pride in what you do, you find that there's no shortage of people who are willing to hire you. Mm-hmm. And the more people hire you, and the better you manage your business, and the better you take pride and ownership in what you do, the more you can have the capital to bail yourself out of of quality control problems, right? And so that was a quality control failure that we paid for. Wow. And so I realize not everyone has that ability, but the reason why we had the ability was because we took that level of pride and ownership. And I'm amazed at the people who do not.
Yep. I'm
amazed at the people who will ask someone else to be the bag holder before they look in the mirror and decide to do the same thing.
You think of the perspective in that story, Eric. I mean, I've never heard anything like that. So to me, when I say that, and I've had conversations with real estate professionals all over the world, and that to me is the first, that's massive. That's huge. And again, some people would argue, hey, well, you made the mistake in the first place, so you're just doing what you should do. But I would argue that's going above and beyond. I've heard, stories about landscaping issues being missed with irrigation. I've heard with appliances being missed. People stepped up and paid for certain aspects, but you're talking about buying the whole thing. And it's more of the message to me behind that and to what that really means. Is upholding to the truth behind treating people a very specific way. It's not what happens, but how we respond that makes the difference. And, to me, not that you're intentionally pointing fingers, but I guess I will, I think everybody should be uphold to that standard, whatever mistake and positive or negative nature it should be. And the fact that you're comfortable enough to share that story with everybody, Eric, that's a big thing, because it's literally just showing flaws and truth and honesty to how you've conducted. And even, thousands of transactions. You've held you and your team and your organization, thousands and thousands of transactions. Like, this is not your first rodeo by any stretch. You've seen it. So to kind of be through that standpoint, massive. So what does that mean to you, Eric? As you're saying this out loud right now, because you said you haven't really shared it too often, what are your thoughts?
I've not shared that for not because I care that we made a mistake, but because I don't know. To me, there was nothing noble about it. It was just the only thing to do. What else do you do? You let somebody else suffer the consequence for something they hired you to do and to solve. That didn't seem like the right, reasonable outcome. We bought washer and dryers. And to your point, I mean, gosh, we bought a shed last year. We bought, I bought more appliances than I've ever owned for sure. Everything that happens along the way ends up becoming quality control systems and processes, because what you realize is all the ways that you screw things up by not having the infrastructure and the redundancy in place to prevent that from happening again in the future. Do we try to find alternatives before offering to bail out our own shortcomings? Absolutely. We just had one last week where we went to get grant money on something because there was an oversight on, with a new agent, and then said, hey, well, good news, just found out we actually didn't need to do it this way. There's some grant options to how we could course correct it, but we were also willing to cover the cost if needed ourselves, because it was a clear, cut and dry breach of responsibility or breach of oversight. And so taking that level of ownership, funny enough, what I find is most of the time, if you just acknowledge it and own it, people are genuinely pretty good. And there are times that, if something is not at fault, or that you didn't screw something up, then it makes it hard to do. And we run into this all the time. And if I take my real estate sales hat off and put on the leadership hat, we run into this a lot. Okay. And the biggest challenge in leadership is always trying to figure out is what is something that as a business we've not facilitated the highest probability of success within the organization for our people. So where is the business responsible? And then where is the person responsible for not facilitating their own success? That's where it gets more challenging than with the consumer. The consumer is pretty cut and dry, because you can tell, because it's all legal and it's all pretty black and white. And there's the understanding of usually where responsibility starts and stops. From a leadership standpoint, very different. Okay. And so what we try to look at then instead is, what's an engagement level? What's the activity look like? Okay. I think of it as if you're a personal trainer, and your client's not losing weight, then we need to go back and audit, how many times are we showing up at the gym and what are we eating? It's possible that the personal trainer sucks. It's also quite possible that the client is eating ice cream at midnight and sleeping in their cardio or whatever it is. And so, trying to delineate between the two and separate out that layer of responsibility, not to point fingers, but to understand how to troubleshoot and improve. Because as an organization, what you don't want to do is you don't want to go and make corrections for people who are disengaged. Because that's not a great way to audit and measure the effectiveness of the organization by the people who don't show up.
Do you have an example of that, Eric? So somebody's putting into perspective as a leadership, right? And they're kind of following what you're tracking. What perspective would they have to look at? Anything that pops in?
Yeah, sure. So every day at 8 a.m. we do we have a liftoff for all of our CEOs. Okay. And I wake up at 5 and start putting it together. I'm editing content, I'm writing content, I'm putting together the playbooks and the specifics on this is what you go do today, or this is the model to follow in order to have success. So last week we did lead generation models. The week before we did leadership frameworks and conversations, as well as the path of money, let's say. Okay. So it's business ownership content for the most part. Okay. And we know who shows up and who doesn't. And there's almost always a trend for those that have the most success are typically correlated to those that show up the most.
Wow.
And so it's therefore sometimes hard to give grace to those that don't show up and then also don't have success.
Yeah.
That's the hardest part. Because success starts with showing up, period.
Well, I would agree with that. And it's kind of the reap what you sow sort of mentality, right? Or you get back what you put in as long as the framework is in order. It's fascinating and fundamental to say, so many people are looking at the kind of the what category, like what is someone doing more so than how are they showing up. And, looking at somebody's day and their activities, you can really tell quickly who is successful and who isn't based off of the quality of the activities that they're doing in the consistent nature that they're doing them in, to move the needle into a business. So I hear what you're saying to that standpoint. And even furthermore, they might have the framework of the activities that need to be done, but are they consistently doing them? Are they showing up to do them in a consistent basis?
Yeah.
Any thoughts into that parameter? I mean, pushing it forward.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just think, the interesting thing that people overlook is when you think about effectiveness and efficiency, we think oftentimes from the efficiency frame of how do you do automation or how do you implement like systems and processes.
Sure.
And arguably the most effective, let's go with the most effective way to increase efficiency is actually to get more intelligent. Is improving your skill set and your knowledge base, therefore improves your effectiveness, which makes you have to spend less time doing the task in order to get the desired result. And so when you do education and when you do training and you offer advice and you offer models and systems to shortcut the process so that someone doesn't have to beat their head against the wall failing over and over and over to learn the lesson that you've already learned and you're willing to share, when they don't show up for the education, that makes it really clear that oftentimes someone's not committed to the outcome. And so it's interesting to watch how some are super hyper focused on learning and understand that knowledge and execution create efficiency. But one of the most inefficient things that you can do as a business owner or as a human is continue to do the same thing without learning.
Wow.
and or discounting the impact that knowledge has on changing the trajectory of your outcome. And so it's fascinating because, you always hear this idea of like fail faster, fail more, so on. And that's cute and cliche. And I'm not saying that it's wrong. However, you don't have to fail your way to success. You can learn from other people's failure. If someone's willing to teach you the lesson they learned from failure and you choose to ignore it, you're an idiot. And most opt out of learning those lessons and instead go learn them themselves, but it doesn't have to be that way. And so we see oftentimes agents, owners, a number of people who forego education or forego training and coaching, thinking that they've either learned it all, know it all, or are doing it effectively. And those are typically the ones who struggle to grow or begin to retreat. They discount the value of knowledge.
Now, I think you touched on a nerve there in my perspective and opinion, because the ones that are not excelling and really making this thing what it should be are not putting in the time and the work and the effort to learn and grow and excel at their, occupation and directive. But the ones who are at a high level are constantly learning, constantly growing, aligning with people who are really elevating their thoughts and their perspective on how to do things and to reevaluate, kind of push the envelope. So why do you think that is, Eric? I mean, let's be completely transparent with this. The people that are winning are doing everything that you just mentioned, which is a small percentage. And the people that are losing, the larger percentage, are not doing that. And why? Why do you think there's a bigger swing that way? When we all know that's the path to success. Like, what is it?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question. I've got a few ideas. One of the things I find is that I love this quote from Gary, or what I think is from there. What he talks about is like the most successful understand it specifically, and those that have moderate levels of success understand it generally. And the best example I can give for this metaphor is, because whenever I say that, everybody's like, okay, what is this riddle that you speak here? Which is standard. And so the best example I can give is that when you learned how to drive, you got your driver's license, you had a general understanding of driving. Today, hopefully, Greg, you have a specific understanding of driving. Your ability to drive without paying much attention is pretty high, all things considered.
Sure.
We've all driven and been like, I don't really remember paying attention to all that much. We were just on this like driving autopilot, right? And so what I find is that many people mistake general knowledge for specific understanding. And that belief that they know something is where they get stuck at that ceiling of believing that because they've learned a concept, they've learned all there is about that concept. And the reality is that it's one of two things. It's a lack of awareness due to a capacity issue, where they goes, hey, listen, all of us have a finite level of capability to understand something. We all have a finite level of intellect. And then there's also the alternative, which is that we all have varying degrees of curiosity. Like, I love my wife to death. I am not curious to know anything about Taylor Swift, no matter how much she talks to me about it. So I'm just not curious about her. I'm not. I don't care about the 1984 era or whatever it was. I'm sure it was amazing. I'm just not curious about it. I will listen solely because I love my wife, but that is the extent of my curiosity. And so it's typically one of those two symptoms, which is like we've met our intellectual capacity or we lack curiosity around a topic.
Yeah. Yeah. And to me, I think that translates for anybody who's tuning in to say, hey, what are you putting into your mind? What are you thinking about? What are you really executing? And have you hit your ceiling of mental capacity, or is it a curiosity or lack thereof into it? I don't know, Eric. I mean, it is a fascinating thing. And I know you and I have discussed levels of success and really how to talk about growth and scale. And but it's always fascinated me, kind of that piece, that element, the separation of the people who are just high drivers, ones that are really hitting ceilings that no one could ever imagine and breaking through them, versus everybody else who's kind of just, I don't know, floating through, checking a box. I mean, yeah. It's always fascinated me. So there is a level of curiosity, at least for me, to understand that. And everybody's different.
It's odd though, because, what I think about is like, the measure of success from a business standpoint, and I say business, what I really probably mean is occupation. Sure. The measure of success from an occupation standpoint is how successful are you against your potential for what your occupation is. And so I think of it as like, my father-in-law works with the fire department, and I'm going to get his rank wrong. So whatever, it's not chief, but it's, something around that area. Sure. And so I think of it in that context. It goes, well, by that measurement, that's someone who's had a high degree of success compared to their potential inside of their occupation. My mother was a VP of HR, and father was an engineer, both of which seemed to be curious about growing and attaining the highest degree of success inside of their own occupation. They don't have curiosity about my occupation.
Sure.
Right, which is fine. I don't have curiosity about those occupations really either, and that's acceptable. But one should apply themselves and take pride and ownership in what they apply themselves to.
Yeah.
And oftentimes there seems to be a disconnect from that.
It's funny, as you mentioned your father, and I know that you and I have a discussion, but I have very little knowledge as to what my father did as an engineer. I don't really know, and so it is interesting that you say that. And I think this is something perspective to put into everybody's lives I know that as an entrepreneur and a professional, especially into the real estate realm, we're so entrenched and just wrapped up into what we do every day for a living and to our occupation or designation. But when we go out there, I feel like there's this persona that everyone should be as curious and intense about it. But the truth of the matter is no one cares. I mean, How many times have you gone to a non-business related event and people probably don't know what you do or a fraction of what's going on, like even close friends or family members?
Yeah, no way.
No one cares.
No.
It's just so bizarre, right?
Dude, it's always interesting to me too. Let's just put this in perspective. I don't even talk about myself. You've interviewed, a number of people who have, TV shows or long running network specials. And my guess is that you still have to wait in line at your family gatherings every holiday. There's probably no preferential treatment for you as a byproduct, and you probably get one or two questions. Yeah, right.
Zero.
Yeah. And I'm assuming you're probably like this, but I've got, I meet with my buddies every Wednesday, and we have like a, what effectively is like a business meeting / like, I don't know, boys club conversation about building real estate team. And the 5 of us probably sell 400 plus houses a year.
Crazy.
And, there are times in which we think of ourselves as just a bunch of idiots, and we are. And, the interesting thing about it is, we were talking the other day, I'm like, if you strip it down just to the numbers of it is, we're in the top 0.01% of the largest industry and the largest economy in the history of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And most days we're lucky to, put our pants on inside out. And so it's interesting because there's very little recognition for that, in the sense that, like, we don't give ourselves that degree of credit.
Mm.
And so, to your point, what we find is even fewer people outside of the industry give us that level of credit.
Yeah.
And so that's the interesting part. There are probably very few careers or very few people who get the level of, like, reverence.
Yeah. Yeah.
And my assumption is those are either TikTokers or pro athletes.
Yeah, I would say either the influencer type or an athlete. There's no doubt. It's crazy as you mentioned that. I think that's going to ring true to a lot of people. I mean, I think as deep as it goes as a title of an occupation that someone may or may not understand.
Yeah.
I mean, and if they understand it, oh, you're a doctor. Oh.
Yeah, correct.
Oh,
yeah.
You're an attorney?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah. I mean, it's just, that's as far as it goes. I mean, It just stops there, man.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just bizarre. But yeah, I think to that point, and to have some levity to everybody's lives. I mean, yes, there's high levels of importance into what we all do, into the day to day, not just for the clients that we serve, but the teams that we, entrust in us and everything along those lines. But ultimately, there is more to it, right? I mean, it's just that there's some fascination to me to that, just to focus on, what we're really spending time with. And I love the fact that, having deeper conversations as, being the dad, and talking about family and you mentioning your wife and things that are outside of the equation, and kind of seeing the full picture of it, Eric. I mean, that's what's great about you is, you've hit every possible record and ceiling. I mean, dominated every single, segment that you touch, and continue to do so on so many levels. But people that get to know you, I mean, I feel like, I got to know you. They just see so many different levels of dimension. And to me, I just love the humor and the way that you're able to carry yourself as just a guy. Like when you tell your story, and hopefully everybody heard this, back at Sherwin-Williams, just being that guy. I mean, there's deeper story to that, because I've heard it. I mean, we've talked about some really craziness into that time frame too, but we're all people, man. And I think that to that point, it's also a level of inspiration to say, look, I mean, if Eric did it, anyone has an opportunity, a chance to do it. I mean, I think that your level of intelligence is a little bit different. Like you said, everybody has a lack of capability that goes through. You're a little different, my friend, but yeah, truly, I mean, if you want it, you can do it,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, but funny enough, I mean, I also used to, back when your college report cards used to come out on like Microsoft Word files or something, like I also was the one that would change that 2.2 to 3.2 before giving that to dad to look at. Right. I mean, because that saved the conversation about why I got a 2.2 in college instead of a 3.2 or whatever it was. And so I guess my thing, I say that because what I wouldn't want someone to do is have the belief and that there's some sort of like superpower to it, or that there's something that's unattainable. The reality of it is like, as I look at it, as a child, I wanted to do radio and color commentary for sports. And so I started that as a kid, and that led to a scholarship of radio and TV, which then led to a job in TV, which led to a job in sales. I got great sales training. That sales training led to being able, and that experience of having my life in a pod in the garage in my driveway, created a real estate career where I became obsessive over learning. And it's that learning based obsession around a craft that I was passionate about that turned into the business today. And so it's just a series of dominoes over, I don't know, like 30 years that stacked up to that level of result, right? I mean, I've been in real estate for 8 years. And in theory, we've accomplished a lot in 8 years. However, if you look at like the Elon Musk mentality of if you work 100 hours and your competitor works 40, then you get 2.5 years for every 1 year of calendar time that your competitors are working time on task. And so that's about the degree of time I spend learning.
Wow.
That comes at a cost. Right. And it comes at a cost of a number of other things, but but that was the difference. And that's why I say everyone else can have that same level of achievement, because you could listen to this podcast on 2X and you could do it in the shower, and you could, and you could trade your TV time for learning time. There's plenty of entertaining ways to learn.
For sure. And again, I think that as you break that down and mention it, kind of the milestones or lineage of the dominoes that you mentioned, and they're still falling, Eric. I mean, there's a whole series of dominoes that you don't even know where they're coming from or where they're at, where they're stacked, else they're going to knock over. Before we wrap this up, though, because I'd be remiss if we didn't mention this one topic. You didn't bring it up, so I want to bring it up for you.
Okay.
So, and correct me if I'm wrong about the story and timeline, but can we talk about a gentleman named Ben?
Gentleman named Ben. Oh, yeah. I didn't bring that up, did I? I think I put that off there, didn't I? Yeah, it's interesting. I love that. That's a great point. I don't think I've ever told this story either. This two in one time. So it was interesting. I started in radio when I was 10, and I'm sure I was terrible, but my mother, she enrolled me in this like mentorship program. And so I got paired with a high school, I got paired with a radio station, and somehow for some reason they let me call, like, I don't know, high school freshman football game or something. And that obsession with radio and TV and play-by-play continued. And I thought I was really good at it. I was in the Indianapolis Star, I think, twice as a high school kid. And I worked for Fox Midwest, their game of the week, covering baseball games in Chicago, Cincinnati, St. Louis. And that was like on Saturdays. I think I was like 16, 17 years old, working with like Frank Thomas, Jim Thome, Nomel Garcia-Parra, Joe Buck, a number of MLB and broadcasters that people would know. And I was in high school. And so I thought I was awesome. And I was going to college on a radio scholarship and TV scholarship, and I'd gotten offers from Syracuse and from Indiana State and Ball State, and I went to Indiana State on a scholarship because they would put me on air first, and so they put me on air before I was even in college, and so I know I'm a big deal, right? Like I know that I'm just such a badass, Greg. Now I'm not sure if I told everyone, but in my own mind, I knew I was just a good. And so I remember Indiana State put me on a football game on Friday night. It was an Indiana State game. And again, I wasn't in college. I wasn't enrolled in school yet. I mean, I was enrolled, but I hadn't started. And normally you have to be like a junior typically to get on air in college. And so I'm assumed to be a freshman. And so they go, hey, we're going to put you on air with this dude named Ben. And Ben is going to start out doing play-by-play, and you'll do color. And, the first game, Ben's going to do play-by-play, you'll do color. And here you go. Congratulations. You guys are now introduce yourselves and put on a headset, and now you got to do the job. Well, in my mind, I'm convinced that I'm going to take Ben's job by halftime. right? Like, because I'm a total badass. And so I'm definitely taking Ben's job by halftime. I don't know Ben, doesn't matter. We just met like 13 seconds ago, but like, this guy can't be that good. I'll for sure put him out of his job by at least halftime. And the funny thing is Ben beat my ass every single day, every minute of every single broadcast from that minute on, from minute one to minute the day I got out of college. And thankfully Ben got out before I did because he was better than me every single day. And because of that, one, I went in with tons of confidence or arrogance, even though hopefully I don't think I showed up that way, but internally I felt that way. And because I felt that way, and I realized quickly that I was so out of my league comparatively, even despite being quasi accomplished as a high school kid, I got a deep level of respect for him early. And then we became friends. And what I realized was that because I had pride and ownership in how I showed up, and because the last thing I wanted to do was turn a microphone on and be just embarrassing, is I had to learn to prepare that much harder in order to try not to get even more embarrassed than I was in comparison to calling games with Ben, because Ben was that good. I mean, just to put it in perspective, I remember traveling on the road. We would cover games for Indiana State. We covered I think 4 or 5 sports while we were there. And I remember going and covering women's college basketball on the road. And Ben would laminate the opposing team's roster with like waterproof lamination, and he would tape it in the shower, the opposing team, women basketball team roster. It'd be name and number. And that was so that he could remember that, Greg is number 22, so that anytime, 22 gets the ball, he could make the association that was Greg. There was no need to hesitate and look down as to who the opposing team player was. I didn't have that level of preparation. Not at all, especially for women's college basketball, dude. Not exactly my level of preparation that in college I'm trying to take that level of focus and discipline on. And so because of that, I had to, because I had a level of respect for him and for myself, I had to start to try to adopt that level of preparation and discipline to the point where like I had to start sleeping in the studio on Saturdays, because I would go out and party, or I would do, I'd go have fun on a Saturday in college, and then I wouldn't get up on time on Sunday in order to do my Sunday commitments for play-by-play or for radio and TV. So I would sleep in the studio so that I couldn't oversleep the job itself. And funny enough, man, to this day, like what's funny is like he always was better, and what I learned to do was prepare. But today, Ben is a play-by-play broadcaster for the Toronto Blue Jays. So to put in perspective, Ben's one of the top 30 people in the world at what he does. And so what's awesome about that, though, is that I showed up with this level of arrogance that I didn't have. I compared myself against someone who's literally one of the 30 best in the world today. And because I had a level of pride in myself and a level of respect for him, I learned how to prepare and learned how to be disciplined and learn how to take criticism and improve as a byproduct of that. And I think that played a role in how I show up today as well, because I got used to having to listen to myself and point out all of my own flaws and shortcomings so that I could go back and try to be better the next time. I took that exact same lesson to going on listing appointments and buyer appointments. I would go and I would record the audio of the listing, and then I would play it back and listen to it. I would deconstruct every appointment I went on to try to understand where I fell short of what the situation should have been in order to get better for the next appointment. So those things stacked together, but that was a byproduct of working with people more talented and having some degree of pride and ownership in myself.
Where do you translate that to the audience listening right now. So if you were advising somebody off of your life experience with Ben, and obviously what you've personally translated into your career, what would you say to somebody tuning in? What are your main learning experiences and takeaways that they could apply based off of what you just told us?
Well, I was fortunate to have someone model the behavior next to me and to actually get to, I mean, I was, groomsman in Ben's wedding eventually over time. And so, we became friends, and I saw his level of preparation and expectation firsthand.
Mm-hmm.
And again, the guy's in the major leagues. So,
Yeah.
So, I mean, he's next level talent and preparation and focus. But if you don't have that opportunity to sit alongside someone who's very elite level,
Sure,
firsthand, you almost always have that opportunity to be side by side, or at least come alongside someone by way of biographies, by way of podcasts, by way of historical learning lessons. There thankfully is the ability to aggregate knowledge and learning from afar when we're not able to be side by side with someone who we want to get on that same level with. Thankfully, most people who have had unparalleled amounts of success are willing to usually pay it forward at some point in their life, even if it means latter portions of their life. So you don't have to work alongside a major leaguer to take that same level of learning and understanding and apply it. You can learn vicariously by listening. I mean, candidly, I've got podcast interviews tomorrow at our conference. And today I listened to 4 interviews for one of the guests that I'm going to be interviewing tomorrow. I listened to 4 episodes of 4 different podcasts he was on so that I can begin to formulate my questions. I didn't have to have a conversation with him in order to decide how that dialogue is going to go. I prepared vicariously through someone else.
I love the fact that you're mentioning the distance, because so many people think that, and this is my opinion based off of working with so many different real estate professionals all over the world.
Yeah.
You're a part of the major leagues, Eric. I mean, you want to talk about the high end of real estate professionals, you're a part of that upper echelon. So the idea is find yourself an Eric Forney. And if you can't geographically, locally, face-to-face find an Eric, then to his point, dial in the content based off of the tutelage you can really study and hone in on. But it's not just the sake of listening. And I want everybody to hear this very clearly. Eric, you studied 4 podcasts, and then you're going to take action on that study to actually have a conversation. So I don't want to encourage everybody to follow the best of something and do nothing with it. Do something with the information that you're learning, apply that knowledge to the true practice. That's where the yielded result is going to come into effect, in my opinion. It's like what you were saying, kind of full circle. It really is that knowledge and the learning continued and the applied action to actually yield a result. I'm a big fan of that advice. I think that's huge. But, selfishly or a shameless plug on your end, I mean, the point is that there are people out there like you, Eric, who are on the upper echelon of who they are and what they do and how they do it. You guys can be accessible to a certain standpoint.
Oh, yeah.
So I just want to be clear on that,
Yeah. I mean, I'm largely where I am today because of the connections that I've made and because of the actions and all of those things. But I would be remiss if I didn't also point out some of the connections. And the reason those connections exist is because I studied the people first and then took the action and then consistently took the action. So from a perspective standpoint, I had a similar experience with how I thought I was great at broadcasting. I also had a similar experience where I thought I was great at real estate in 2015. I was working full-time selling paint. And I'm also a full-time real estate agent, and I'm also a real estate agent. And, I think that year I'd sold 76 houses. And that was pretty good for somebody who had a full-time job.
Yep. And
so I felt like I was a badass, right? I just was awesome at this thing. I had this real estate thing figured out.
Yeah.
And I remember I was not with Keller Williams. I went to my very first Keller Williams event, and and it's kind of wild. Actually, I'll be interviewing 3 of the 4 people that I first saw on stage tomorrow in Vegas. But
Oh, man.
but I remember again, I think I'm a badass, and I go to this conference, and I remember thinking, I have no idea what these people are saying. I don't understand the words coming out of their mouth. Maybe I remember I'd sold 76, and someone had sold 660 houses that was at the event at the time. Yeah, right. And I was like, okay, maybe I don't know shit about shit. And one of the guys on that stage, I didn't understand more than all the others. And that guy was had a real estate team in like 3 or 4 states, and was also the top home builder in the state that he lived in. Had qualified for the world champions of Ironman. Was married with 3 kids. Dreamed about his wife and his 3 kids, and was a pro golfer as well. That guy was Adam Hergenrother, and Adam's my boss today and my friend. And Adam, like, I didn't understand anything that he said, for one, and then I certainly didn't understand how he was so damn successful.
Oh, yeah.
And so when I went home, what I tried to find was all of the information I could find from Adam, because what I wanted to know was, what did he know that I didn't know that made him so unbelievably more successful than me? And so for probably 2 years, anytime I could find content online to take in from Adam, that I would ingest it. And I followed him on Facebook or something, and then one day I saw this post before leaving for work, and it said something to the effect of, like, Adam's taking on 1 coaching client. I think it was like 1 spot for a coaching client. Write an essay as to, like, why you should coach with Adam. And why in the hell I even did it, I have no idea. But I wrote this essay about why I should coach with Adam. I thought I was like applying for a contest or something. Yeah. And I am not that guy. Yeah. And yet for that day I was, because I was like, man, what does this dude know? I don't know, because it's on a whole different level. And so I wrote an essay, and I get this email back. I don't know how many days later it was. It's like, hey, congratulations, Adam. Is picked to work with you. It'll be $2,500 a month. I'm like, oh, well, so much for that. I thought like I was going to win some contest. Nope, I'm going to write a check. There you go. And so for 4 years, we talked every week, and I tried to extract as much knowledge and learning and information as possible from Adam. Wow. And I never asked for anything more than the 30 minutes that I got. And by consistently showing up, prepared for every call every week, regardless of where I was, whether I was on vacation or in a different time zone, I showed up for my meeting and I was prepared. And so because of that, when he had the opportunity to partner with Gary in 2021, I got a call that was, hey, this is what we're doing. Do you want to be a part of it? He's like, I don't know what it looks like, but I got this opportunity and I think we're going to need leadership help. Do you want to throw down? And so it was a pretty easy decision. Sure. Because by that time, 4 years later, we had become friends and mentor, and and he had always been good to me and to my wife and my family, and vice versa. And so it was an easy decision. But I say all that long story to say that it started by just going to a conference and observing someone who seemingly had something or knew something I didn't know, and then taking the action to try to acquire the knowledge and the information, then going to the access, being willing to pay for the access, and then holding up my end of the deal, which was always being prepared and always doing what I committed to do.
That, as you're mentioning that, there were so many takeaways for people to just soak in, digest, and really apply. I mean, Eric, when you mention Adam, I mean, I still say one of my absolute favorite episodes that I've ever had on Titans, Adam Hergenrother. I mean, the fact of the matter that you felt the way you felt about him in your first interaction, I get it. I totally get that. Anybody who knows him gets that. But here's what's incredible about it. You take it to somebody like yourself, and being able to accomplish what you've accomplished in the time frame that you've accomplished and continue to, but then taking it upon yourself to then finding these individuals that have, in your mind at least, and maybe to the physicality, have surpassed where you currently are. You took it upon yourself to then continue to push and align, to learn and to grow. And there wasn't a level of satisfaction to say, well, I made it. I'm here. This is it. Here it comes. And I think that's a testament to everybody, that there's always something, no matter where you're at, no matter what you think you're accomplished, there's always somebody that is multiple steps further, that have gone that much, past that level. So the burning desire, if it's there's people that are out there that you can learn from and grow from, and that you're never there. There's never a place to say that you've made it in there. And that means you're living proof of that, Eric. And the fact that it's full circle, when you went to the initial conference and now, tomorrow you're interviewing 3 of those individuals, that's crazy.
Yeah, it is actually. Now I think about it. Yeah. I mean, we went on vacation with 2 last year. And, and then we'll go have dinner with Adam tomorrow. And I mean, that's, like I said, now it's odd. It's a little odd to say it that way, only because again, Adam, yes, is my boss, but 2 is also my friend. And so it's odd to have that dynamic, to think about having a point in time where, I would have applied as an essay to why I should have a coaching conversation with him. But yeah, I mean, it's a full circle for sure. I mean, it certainly is not something that I expected.
Wow. Love it. I mean, Eric, I can't thank you enough as always to dive deep into this, sharing, more of your personal story and your side and your journey with the audiences, as I always love and appreciate. But at the end of the day, I encourage everybody to really listen to the dialogue that's been here and take something away, apply to it, be inspired by, the fact that there is more in this world. And if you want it, go get it. But there are paths to take. There's action to take. It's consistency. It's massive amounts of effort if you want it. No one's stopping yourself but you.